Welcome everyone to the December board meeting of Ignite CDA. If we'd all stand and for the Pledge of Allegiance. I
Pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Thank you all. It's time for public comment. Any public comment? Thought we had one there. Seeing none, I'll entertain a motion for the consent calendar.
I'll make a motion to approve the consent calendar, including the November 20th, 2024 board minutes, the district monthly financial statements, and the agency payables as submitted.
I'll second.
Moved and seconded. Any questions, discussion? All in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Motion passes. Executive Director's Report. Tony Burns, take it away.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'd like to invite Mr. Phil Boyd up to chat about the Atlas project action items, as well as to kind of give a project update.
Welcome, Phil.
Thank you, Chairman Hoskin and board members and Tony. So just three things tonight. The Phase 3 earthwork contract amendment, you guys had a little memo on that. The monument sign contract amendment, that was also part of that memo. And then Tony and I wanted to talk through the Phase 3 development process and show you a schedule and just get some board feedback and maybe general agreement of the path that we think we're headed down or propose to head down. So the Phase 3, you guys have seen this. I know that the topography doesn't mean a lot here, but you might recall that the site was short with some fill material to get to a preferred grading configuration. We could live with what's out there, but it wouldn't be great from the standpoint of being able to step through these different home sites and kind of terrace them, as opposed to just having them all sitting in the hole. Because right now, this area is low. And so we wanted to be able to bring it up a little bit so the homes didn't feel like they were sitting in a hole, and then also be able to terrace them as we move in this direction. So when we finished the last earthwork project, the conclusion is we're not in a rush to actually start infrastructure here. Let's wait and see if in 2025 structural soils become available from other construction sites, and we'll just pause on doing anything else there. We were aware that I-90 is going to be lowered and widened to the west of Northwest Boulevard, so we started looking at that, considering pursuing some of that material. And then La Riviere called and said, hey, we were successful as the site contractor on the Marriott project, excavating the parking garage material. Would Ignite be interested in that soil material for here? And we said, well, let's work on a price. So we worked on a price, and they came back at $290 and this is just to spread and compact per cubic yard. We have previously, from 2022 numbers, we've been paying $250 a cubic yard. So it's a modest increase of what we have been paying. And so that was a reasonable number we arrived at. The geotechnical part is we need to document that the soils is placed and compacted. We need to create a final report. It's submitted to the city. And then when you sell the property, we give those reports to the developers so they are aware that the site is structural. These last two items here, I'm not sure that we'll need them, but I wanted to put them in the budget so we had kind of this maximum number that the board can consider. The reason I don't think we'll need it is because the number of trips going into the site will be very slow, so we don't think there'll need to be traffic control, and they're leaving unloaded. And we don't think there'll be a bunch of off-tracking needing street sweeping, but we wanted to budget for it. So the proposed contract amendment would be for $127,100. It's a unit price contract, so we only pay for what's placed or utilized on it. So with that description of the project, I'll pause and be glad to answer any questions.
Phil, what would they do with this fill if we did not need it? Like, where would it go otherwise?
It would probably, I would anticipate they would haul it up to Kathleen, up to the Kathleen pit, and probably tip it there. Yeah, or on the last project, on the Thomas George, the contractor, because we tried to get that material, and tried to work out a deal with them, and they wanted to keep it, so they took it and I think hauled it to Post Falls and stockpiled it on their property to use later, which they drove right by us. We saw the trucks going by at Atlas, and we tried to get it from them, but we couldn't come to a reasonable price with them because they wanted us to pay for the soil materials to buy it from them, which we've had a couple of contractors say, hey, we'll bring materials, but we want $5 a yard for it or something like that, and pay them to bring it and spread it and compact it.
You said this is a unit cost estimate? Is that
Yes.
a guaranteed max, or is that just a budget estimate?
So the number here is Le Riviere's, I think what they anticipate taking out of the Marriott site. This surface here, which is a preliminary surface, because it's not a final graded surface, because that's a whole lot of work, but we did this preliminary surface. And from the existing grade that is out there today, and this finished grade, there's 21,000 yards that we need. So we anticipate placing sub 25,000 yards. So we anticipate being below that number.
Thank you.
So 25,000 yards is available.
Yes. Yes.
And 21,000 yards gets you complete.
Yes, it gets us to our finished grade. One caveat though. Thank you for asking that question. If the fire station goes in here, there'll be a big retaining wall that goes along that edge. And then this area would need to be filled in. But you could argue that that would be a fire station project cost, just like the retaining wall would be. There may be an off chance that if we see that that's happening and there is excess material available from the Marriott site, we might suggest to Le Riviere, you could leave it here and we might buy it from you in a year or two, but if we don't, then you have to haul it away. Because it would be very economical for that perspective. So that would be a side agreement with them, what we might look at as we get closer to finished grade.
Another question, and thank you, Phil, for answering this, is just out of curiosity. The material that would come out of the Marriott site, do you know that that is suitable structural fill?
Yes, and yep, another good question. So before we let any of the material come into the site, we get the geotech report from the Marriott material. Our soils geotech engineer looks at it, and then they are out there on site while the work is spreading and compacting is getting done. The nuclear densometer tests are done. But that's the first place we started with is, can you send us the geotech report?
And then you know that you will be able to compact that to support light frame construction. That's kind of your whole.
Yep.
Very good. Thank you, Phil.
Could you go back to the drawing, please? If the fire station doesn't go in, will the finished grade that's there then with the 21,000 then be suitable for those townhomes?
Yes.
Okay.
Yep, because we're going to finish grade to this just because we don't know if the fire station is going to materialize or not.
We won't need an additional then for the townhomes, I guess, is what I was.
No.
Thanks.
Good- Yep, good question.
I'm done. I think.
So, Phil, when is this scheduled to begin?
It will begin in January, and it will, we haven't gotten a definitive schedule out of them, but it will take some time because it's such a slow loadout from the Marriott site. You know, the cycling of the trucks, they get loaded slowly, so they'll show up here slowly.
And this is a price, not buying the dirt, this is just paying for the fill material.
Just paying to spread it and compact it.
Right.
And so we'll provide them this surface electronically because they do what's called machine grading. They upload it and, yeah, you know this. I forget who I'm talking to. Yeah.
So, Just out of curiosity then, would they be paying a waste fee if they brought to the Kathleen?
They would be
meeting?
paying a waste fee, yep.
So they still want to increase from 250 to 290, even though they could be facing a waste fee?
Unless they were to take it and not tip it at Kathleen. If they were to take it, and that was the discussion in the negotiations we were having with them. And at the end of the day, the conclusion is we'll spread it and compact it for 290, or we'll take it somewhere else. And so the comparison I put in the memo for you guys would to just give a kind of an order of magnitude difference between what we would need to pay, which I think we would all probably agree we wouldn't pay market rate to bring material here. We would just wait for structural to show up. And there's maybe there's an opportunity to get some somewhere else, but this is kind of one that's handy.
Close.
Yeah,
Thank you.
welcome.
If the board is so willing, we'd look for a motion to go ahead and approve this contract modification with Revere Inc.
And Phil, you said this is going to start in January?
Yes.
Okay. Soon.
We're looking for a motion?
I would make a motion that we use Phase 3 Riviera contract change order for structural material import and placement.
I can second that.
Moved and seconded. Any further discussion?
Chairman Hoskins, I'm sorry, I've got one, I forgot to bring out one point.
Go ahead,
The-
Phil.
The board might recall that we've had a number of budget allocations for the different phases of the project. So we had Phase 0, and there was a certain amount of money that the board proposed to fund on that. That project came under budget, and that one was not rolled forward. I think you guys, that one just came in under budget and was done. That was the park. Then Phase 1 happened, and that project came in a little bit under budget, but that number stayed in the Atlas bucket. And then Phase 2A, then Phase 2B. The project overall is under budget, and so this is not going to be any additional money the board is adding to the projects. It's within your previous authorizations. Maybe that's the best way to say it. I wanted to just clarify
Oh, I
that.
appreciate that, yeah.
As a point of reference, then, the alternate cost that was cited in the memo was at market price to import the same kind of material would be $680,000, so $27 a yard
Yeah.
roughly is the current market price.
That's what we're seeing, yeah. Yeah.
Great, thanks.
Any further discussion? All in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? Motion carries.
Thank you.
Thanks, Phil.
We'll move forward on that. So our next favorite topic is monument signs. And so at the last board meeting, what I concluded with is I wanted to come back with a conceptual price from La Riviere based on this, where we handed them these drawings after you guys said, yep, we like this sign, go forward and get it priced. I wanted to come back with a preliminary price from La Riviere to be able to tell you, we had all talked about two signs being $150,000. La Riviere's done a conceptual level estimate. It's either within or not within that budget. And then present to you a contract amendment to go design the signs, to redesign the signs to get a permit from the city, because we'll need to get a building permit for these signs. La Riviere has not been able to complete their conceptual level pricing. They're still waiting on pricing from their metal fabricator for this piece. We did do some value engineering with regarding to the lights of pulling out power services and potentially using solar lights to do this, and that was in the memo to you folks. So I want to just preface it with that, and then I also want to preface, as Del Hatch and I were continuing to talk about the sites and the signs and their location and their orientation, Del concluded, we probably need to rotate them a little bit, perhaps like this. They are also set back quite a ways from the street because of the right-of-way there. The right-of-way is very wide. And as I'm looking at it, and Del and I are looking at this street view, this view, I'm getting worried. And you guys are gonna have to excuse the crude engineer artistry here. The architect is probably gonna laugh at me here, but I did my best. To show where these signs might sit in kind of a bulk and scale, just from the overall size of them. And, you know, you guys remember what it looks like down here. The thing I want to just be absolutely sure of is we're kind of doing this stuff in our mind's eye. You guys are setting a budget and you have some level of expectation of what these signs look like. And I want you to be as comfortable and as certain as possible if we move forward with the project that you're like, yep, we're getting the value that we expected to see there and it was money well spent. So I might be just being a little bit cautionary, but as Tony and I talked through this, Tony thought that was a prudent approach to just to make sure we're all comfortable with what will occur out there. Because the signs it's quite a bit smaller than the original one. Remember, the one was big. And so this is a big departure downward. So that's why I put this together. And then I'll just kind of finish up the presentation. We'll go backwards. So the board budgeted $150,000 for construction. As I said, we're waiting on La Riviere's number. Our proposed contract amendment would be to do the structural design, which when we got the number for the structural guy, seems like it was a little bit high. We went back and talked it through with them, and this brand new foundation, lots of detailing and connections. This is Dell's work to do all the detailing he needs to do. We need to get an easement on this east side here. It should be west side. We already have the easement on the east side, on the west side, so I've got a typo there. And then the permit application. So what I think would be prudent, if the board says, yep, we still want to move forward with the signs, we don't have the preliminary pricing yet. You previously set the budget at $150. One thought would be to make this contract amendment, if you agree with it, contingent upon us getting a conceptual level price back within your budget, if that's all making sense. Because there's no point in designing anything, right, if the conceptual level budget is above. Or we just kick the whole thing down the road and come back in January when I do have that in hand, which is fine too. So I hope I'm not being too wishy-washy. This sign is such a departure from what we originally started with.
What's the scale on this now?
This is roughly 9 feet tall, and it's about 9 feet wide. Yeah.
So your concern at this point is really the scale?
Yes.
And because of the location back from the easement and stuff, is the scale appropriate for it to do the job that it's intended?
Exactly, and it's kind of hard to tell from here. You can kind of see it here. The topography drops off quite a bit here, and so one of the things, and this is the thing we had worked through with the structural, we're going to have a fairly deep foundation here. So we're going to end up tearing all of this landscaping out. We'll end up putting a foundation that has the appropriate bury depth on the backside, and then we'll end up with probably a little rockery wall behind it, in order to kind of create a level spot in there. And that's the part that starts to, we're bolting on these other things as we're really getting into thinking about going into preliminary design. But it is just the scale, and I don't want the board to be disappointed when we go out there.
Another question, Phil, and this is pertaining to what Mick had to say there, is the sign is 9 feet tall. Is the 9 feet from the path?
It is, yep,
The
so
point of-
here's the finished grade, and it's 9 feet 2.
Okay, because the nature of the question is you said it dropped off, so if it goes down,
Yep.
okay.
And that's why you can see it, that we would build it at path height.
Yeah.
So it's at path height, but that's gonna require a little bit of a rockery wall behind it, but we don't wanna make the rockery wall elaborate and taller than 4 feet, because then that tricks a building permit, or building permit. And so we're trying to be economical about it. And as we were working through some of these details with La Riviere, that's why we pulled out maybe the lighting, because we have to drop power services to both sides. So you're gonna have a power meter on both sides, and we thought about, well, maybe we should think about pulling that out if we're gonna have some additional site costs. I know that's a lot of information, and maybe I'm being overly cautious, but just wanna be sure.
I have a question maybe for the board here, is that you approved an estimate of 150,000, saying move forward, see what you can do in 150,000. If I'm understanding this, it would be 150,000 plus A&E fees.
Correct.
Okay,
Yes, yep.
so
161.
that increases that.
Yep,
And that was 11,000-ish?
yep.
So the option is to say 150,000 inclusive of A&E or as an add-on. That's,
Yep.
I just wanted to clarify.
Yep.
Tony, what was the original budget that we started with on signage? I mean, we were actually putting signage on Suzanne, and those are all gone now.
Correct. Yeah, as I recall, maybe Phil knows it better, it's in the several $100,000 range.
That's
It was 360.
370, I was gonna
Yeah.
say 370.
Yeah,
And that was how many signs?
it was,
Expectation that we were gonna do this, or is this gonna, negative expectation that we were gonna do this, or is this gonna negatively impact your ability to sell the land, you know? So we really tried to be very thoughtful about the process, about, you know, downsizing or changing the scope of the sign activity, and it really felt like, it wasn't necessary to put all those signs in all those different places, and they didn't need to be a huge monument sign. They really just were kind of a place name. I can't think of the word what I'm trying to think of, but you get my drift.
I get it. I was just waiting to see if there was any
No.
negative pushback from anyone who said, no, you promised us signs, but you didn't hear that.
Didn't hear that.
And then if there's a short answer to this part, if not, I get it, I'm way behind the curve on the sign story. Why are there 2 signs there instead of 1 in the island?
the city won't allow us to put a sign in the right-of-way here. So the reason that they're so far back is
They're out of the easement.
they're on private property in easement. Yeah, you're not allowed to get an encroachment permit for the sign for a sign in the city right-of-way anymore.
So you're looking for a motion then really like not to exceed 161,000 maybe, or would that be sufficient, Tony?
Well, you could, several ways you could do this. I think, if you just want to take the recommendation to make this, motion on 11,000 contingent on the construction coming back at 150,000, not to exceed that, then I think that would work. Or you could just say the entire package not to exceed 161,000, whatever you prefer.
Who has a preference? Speak up.
Awkward silence.
Yes.
Well, I guess I have a question. So does the 11,000 contract amendment, would that amount fluctuate? I guess it doesn't. I'm kind of answering my own question, but does it fluctuate based on the ability to achieve or not achieve the 150,000? Because to me, it's a sunk cost, because that's kind of part of the process, right?
Well, that's what I didn't want to do. I didn't
Okay.
want to sink that cost
Okay.
until we got a conceptual level price from La Riviere on this. So that just a little bit on conceptual level pricing, you can go to the contractors and generally say, here's what we're trying to do. They don't know exactly the size of rebar that's in there and all the little details, but they can get us within, plus or minus 15% or so in the pricing. And that was the idea of, will we fit within that 150 before we go redesign the signs? And so they were willing to do that for us. I wanted to bring that number to you today. They don't have it finished yet and so if they come back next week or 2 weeks from now and say, gosh, it's 170, well, then I know I'm not going to start any design work because the board hasn't authorized me to do that. Because I don't want it to be a sunk cost, Commissioner Garcia.
Got it.
Maybe the board would feel more comfortable by just delaying action on this until we kind of get the pricing from the contractor.
I think I would feel most
Yeah.
comfortable just
It's not
delaying.
holding anything else up.
Sure, as a point of clarification perhaps, Mr. Chairman, oftentimes in a design build scenario like this, Phil, you can work with those guys and say, hey, here's our target. If it
Yep.
comes in above that, give us some ideas how to get
Yep.
back into submission, so we're not spending more architecture dollars when sometimes the contractor knows better what's the really fancy part, and maybe we could value engineer this on the fly a little bit. So that relationship exists where they can come back and short circuit some of the cycle time we're struggling with.
That's absolutely right, Commissioner Meyer, and we've done some of that already. Just as we started on it, we're on the phone with them, and they're like, hey, do we gotta do this, and we gotta do that, and how are we gonna deal with this, and what about the power? And we were trying to answer some of those questions. The thing we have not heard about is from their steel detailer about these parts, because there's a lot of moving pieces and moving parts in that, and there might be some value engineering just in this part. This concrete part and the veneer is pretty vanilla construction. But when you get into this stuff, it gets, as you can tell, it's a little more detailed here. So that's the part we have not heard about, and you're right, we'll hear about that certainly in the next month.
I think I'm in general consensus with the postponing at this point. We're,
Okay,
no reason to take that risk.
Okay,
very good.
no action.
That's what we'll do, and we'll
Thanks.
come
Thank
back.
you, Phil.
bet.
Thank you.
Okay,
I'm kind of surprised there was no questions on colors.
what's that?
No questions on colors.
Oh, yes, we're not allowed to talk about color.
Okay.
As Tony and I started talking that through, we thought, well, we better pause a little bit and be really careful about thinking that through. So then we had the whole Atlas team together, which includes Hillary Patterson, Ben Wharton from Heartland, the real estate advisory, Danielle, myself, and Tony. Yeah. And it seemed, we put together this process for the board's consideration that perhaps the first thing we should do is go out and talk to two major groups. One is the attainable housing stakeholders, and this might be PAHA or Habitat for Humanity or Idaho Housing, and just have detailed discussions with them about what does this look like on the back end, and what are some things we need to be aware of. And in addition to that, we need to talk to the Atlas developer stakeholders, because they're a big part of our world, right? And we want to do no harm. And so we want to hear what their concerns are, and then make notes on what might be important to them and bring that information back. So we thought, well, maybe we'll go do that in January. This is a big lift here, and Commissioner Miller knows all about this. We're not sure if that's going to take a couple months or is it going to take 3 or 4 months. But so this might be a more aggressive schedule, but we thought that would be a prudent step to think about two things. One is, how do you manage the attainable housing? But the more challenging thing is how do you put out an RFP under Ignite rules in a way that is digestible by developers, and they don't look at it and go, this is too complicated. Because we've seen that already, as you guys know. We've struggled with developers that are commonly develop, but they get into the Ignite world, and we have all kinds of, maybe I should say Danielle has all kinds of rules. No, the URA has a bunch of rules. Danielle just enforces them. But we have to work through that process. And so we started talking this through, and we thought we better spend some time looking at that. So once we get through those first two steps, then we would forge ahead. Before you really start spending money, it seemed prudent to do those first two steps. So I'll just kind of pause there, and I don't know if Tony or Danielle have any thoughts to add as well.
Well, just to add a few thoughts. So, we're still thinking about 71-ish lots out there. So that's a lot of lots, and we're looking at 50% attainable, so 35-ish would be attainable. And we had a good conversation today about, how do you bring that level of volume to the market, and how do you construct it in a way that it all looks the same? Because that's one of our goals, home ownership, that really, somebody really can't tell what is attainable from market rate. And so just the magnitude and scope of trying to figure out how best to deploy that is going to take some time, and bringing in a partner like a PAHA or a Habitat to kind of help in the long-term management of the attainable once they are built and sold is another element of this. So it's going to be a little bit of a challenge, especially since we got that feedback from on our Area 7 market rate lots that there was really no appetite for acquisition. So we're still a little nervous on the real estate market about that, as well as, how do you bring this level of capacity on the market in a wise and prudent fashion?
Questions, comments?
And as I pointed out my email to you, this is an aggressive schedule that we've developed, and it's going to probably eke out a little farther on those lines as we kind of go. But what we have found, and with Phil's help and his team, is that, we were lucky to get the fill that we needed to get the site ready for development. And so we thought we'd start really looking at how we're going to bring this online as quick and reasonably as we can. And this kind of paints a picture of a super kind of a aggressive, venue where when we could do that. But we can start actually planning, since we're going to have the site ready to build on.
Tony, are we thinking we're gonna have one contractor for all 71 going to selling it to a developer? I guess I'm trying to figure out, Daniel, the rules of urban renewal versus just the way we've gotten bids on land in the past.
Yeah, there is some complexity in giving it to a nonprofit versus going through the RFP process. I think we could probably work through that. It just gets more complex when we're doing 50% attainable and 50% market with one developer, because we can't, we would have to have them sell the market rate essentially, and potentially like simultaneously transfer to PAHO, who then transfers to a property owner. There's just a lot of complexity to work through, and us selling directly to property owners would be very difficult.
So Mick, to perhaps elaborate on that, the idea that if we wanted to do in the most integrated fashion, if we describe the ethos of what we're trying to accomplish here is, looks the same, feels the same, nobody knows what anybody paid for the house when it's all said and done, having that done under one developer is intrinsically going to be easier and to accomplish that consistency, which means we may accept lower prices per lot on the for sale product in order to ask somebody to take on that kind of brain damage, because it sounds like you're limited in some of the legal requirements of what we can do. But perhaps we can also look at, in parallel, examining more flexibility and timing and some things here that it's easier, it seems to me philosophically, to offer a for-profit developer more flexibility than we've offered prior developers, because we've often had some bantering about that before, if they're willing to take on this other element of the project that has some other complexity to it. Are we able to address that?
Yes, and I mean, this isn't necessarily a legal advice, so these guys can jump in if I'm conveying this wrong, but we did have that discussion today about kind of talking to the developers that we think could digest this project in advance, and kind of like pre-marketing it and helping them understand what we were looking for and getting their feedback about what they would need to be able to make something like that work, because it is a fairly substantial development. So I think that we would, in those conversations, which would probably be had by Heartland, they would kind of suss some of that out. What would be helpful?
Perfect. I think getting the private sector feedback up in advance, so we design something that's very, digestible, makes a lot of sense. Obviously, you guys are doing that, but I really like the idea of trying to take it all off in one bite, just because that integrated process is going to be so much easier to manage on the execution side.
We even talked about like the flexibility of having two different models for how the developers get paid. So like on the for-profit part, they get paid based on the sales prices, but on the other side, maybe they're paid a fee that would help us control the costs and make it predictable and help us in our work with, whatever nonprofit we decide to go with. So we've been really trying to brainstorm the most creative approach to get to where I think you guys are going.
Perfect. I think it's just, two ears, one mouth kind of approach to this, because there's a lot of complexity we don't understand, and the guys who are in the trenches every day can really be insightful in that. So, great work.
I think that sums up the approach that we're thinking about here, is going out and talking to those folks, so what we bring back to the board has some credibility to it, and it's actually ground truthed, because we want to be successful, right? We don't want to roll anything out that hits the market and goes like this, and everyone's like, too complicated, not interested. We don't want that to happen.
Are you able to talk with out-of-area managers who've done these types of projects before for input, or is that not a thing?
No, absolutely. I think we
I
would.
don't know your side, the rules side of how you put this out. I just know that there are projects that have happened like this, and third-party managers that deal with it into perpetuity, and so.
Absolutely, and particularly if it was part of a URA, that's the part that, if there was a
That
URA
part I don't
component to
know.
it, that would be super helpful. But I think we're, back to Commissioner Meyer's point, we're prepared to go out and kind of talk to whoever we need to make sure that what comes back to the board has some meat to it. So we would take, especially Commissioner Miller, you've done a lot of groundwork on this, so we'd be glad to pick your brain and any other resources you might have.
Phil, has Heartland had much experience with this type of?
Matt at Heartland has. He hasn't been on the calls recently. And when we were talking about it today, Ben, who's been our primary point of contact, said, we're going to bring Matt back into the fold, because he's done a number of developments like this in Washington, Oregon, and somewhere else that I can't remember. Utah, maybe.
I feel like Heartland has been a very good partner
Yeah.
for us on the Atlas project, and if they have some expertise in this area that we can lean on, that would be awesome.
Yeah.
And I for one, will say I like this approach. I like the idea of, taking this thoughtfully, going through a thoughtful approach and making sure that we're not biting off more than we can chew, and not setting ourselves up for failure, but setting ourselves and the community up for success in the process. So I like this approach myself.
We had a discussion earlier about maybe an ad hoc committee, putting some, like, taking care of items 1 and 2 there, or helping do that. Is that something that's interesting to anybody? Tony, Danielle?
That'd be fine if you guys want to create a, subgroup to kind of work with us on that.
I know it's not an action item here, but that's just, we should start thinking about it if somebody wants to do that, and, get some stakeholders and some correct city people, and
I'd be involved in that if it comes together.
I think in the grand scheme of things, that would have some advantage, Mr. Chairman, just because the more people with their nose inside the tent and understanding how the process works, I think we're in uncharted ground here as an organization.
And we wanna do it right.
The more transparency opportunities we have, I think we want to lean into those. So I like the idea. Yes, it's going to probably bog down the process and be a little slower, but the stakeholders will understand why we're doing what we're doing. And I think that makes this project a little more palatable in the community, and potentially uncovers opportunities to repeat this if we're able to be successful. So I think, again, willing to serve at the right time and place if there's an opportunity.
okay.
So I heard 2 members then, right? So far.
I wrote them down.
Oh, and Commissioner Jester as well? Because from our end, it's super, we love it when board members can participate, because you guys see nuances that may miss us, or things that are important to you, right? Because you're the decision makers, and so we want to make sure that we're answering your questions there, so when we get to hear, it's smoother.
I think the ad hoc group could maybe flesh out more of a list of stakeholders as well. I know that in some of the other projects, financing on some of these properties, depending on what's involved, might need to add some more people than just the actual PAHAs and habitats and some builders. We might need to add some other industries in there to get it right.
Okay, well, we've got good marching orders, and I think are we good, Tony?
Yeah, appreciate the conversation. We just wanted to kind of daylight this to you, and kind of, now that the site will be ready to develop, we just wanted to start having this conversation about the plan of attack, about how to get our hands around the best way to approach this, so.
No, I like the aggressive schedule, and it looks like we're going out to RFP, third, fourth quarter next year, so.
Under the aggressive schedule, yeah, but
Nice,
yeah,
we're gonna stick
yeah.
to it.
All right, Commissioner Hoskins, that's all I have.
Thanks, Phil.
Okay,
Thank you, Phil.
thank you.
That's all I have, Mr. Chairman.
Thanks, Tony. Next up on the agenda is board commissioner comments. I just want to wish everybody a happy holidays and safe holidays. Anybody else with a board commissioner comment?
Not this evening.
I'll entertain a motion to adjourn.
So moved.
Second?
All in favor?
Aye.
Motion carries, and we're adjourned, and that's a wrap.